The very first. Welcome, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and distinguished participants. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the second BioJent virtual broadcast that is dedicated to exploring the intricacies of the topic from lab to market, commercializing university technologies. We will embark on a journey of discovery, engaging in a meaningful conversation and exchange with our esteemed speakers and with you, our wonderful audience. You are participating today in a specific topic of high interest, and we will explore very practical approaches to transitioning of university technologies from lab to the market. We'll be featuring today insights from top universities such as MIT, Stanford, and UC Irvine, as well as several examples from National Science Foundation. What we hope that you'll accomplish today is to gain valuable knowledge about the biotech industry, effective commercialization strategies, and also network with our speakers as well as with the community that is attending this event. Thank you for being part of this exciting venture, and allow me please to introduce our esteemed guests. We have with us tonight Joe Hadzima, who is president of IP Vision and senior lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management, and he was one of my best professors at MIT Sloan. Welcome, Joe. We also have with us Rieko Yajima, who is Director of Drug Discovery and Innovations with the Stanford University Spark program. And welcome, Rieko. And we also have with us Errol Arkilic. He is Chief Innovation Officer with UC Irvine. He is also Executive Director of Beall Applied Innovation. My name is Ovidiu Bujorean, and I'm the CEO and founder of OviBees Ventures. We partner for the implementation of BioJent with Japan Society of Northern California, and we are bringing you a set of entrepreneurship-focused activities that include 3 virtual broadcasts. We had the first one focused on raising capital for biotech ventures. This is the second one on commercializing university technologies. And we have a third one coming on building successful teams in biotech ventures. My colleague Gaio will share with you in the chat the details about how you as participants can register for the third webinar, third broadcast, where we also have outstanding speakers. OviBees Ventures, our company, has worked a lot with both developed countries and emerging markets to help support the development of the biotech, of the entrepreneurship ecosystems in different industries. BioJent, as I was mentioning earlier, is one of our key initiatives that we are developing together with Japan Society of Northern California, and it is sponsored by the United States Embassy in Tokyo. We have also benefited from the support of the U.S. Consulate in Fukuoka, in particular of Brandon Posin. Thank you, Brandon, for your continued support. And also we benefited from the support of the Greater Tokyo Biotech community. Thank you, Setsuo-san, and also from the support of Oric law firm. Let me invite all of you now, if you can take a moment to also visit biojent.com. I want to let you know that our team has prepared a beta platform to build the entrepreneurial community in the biotech sector between the United States and Japan. We invite all of you to join this community. We have the recorded content from the half-a-day event that we organized in December in Japan with very practical sessions there. And we also have the first broadcast on raising capital, and we'll be hosting this one and the next one. That is also a wonderful opportunity for you to meet with other colleagues who are participants in the ecosystem. With this done, welcome our guests. And I would like to start by asking a couple of questions from our speakers. And I invite our audience to start sending us questions. And my colleague Ayo will review your questions and will share it with me so we can direct them to the proper speaker. Let me start with Joe. What is, in your view, the main challenge in bringing a scientific discovery to the market?
Thanks, Ovi. I think it depends on the nature of the discovery. I group things into discoveries in search of a market, and then the other side are problems in search of a solution. When breakthrough technologies are looking for applications, the challenge is finding an initial application which matches the stage of the technology development to a pain point in the market. That initial application in most cases is not the major long-term market. And finding the initial application is usually not very easy, especially if the inventor doesn't have any business experience or business experience on his team. This is where I found that the customer discovery process used in the National Science Foundation I-Corps program is key. That's something Errol was instrumental in developing. I'm sure he'll have some comments on that. Where there's a problem in search of a solution, commercialization, at least the initial commercialization, is more straightforward because you have a use case already defined and a potential customer ready. There's another way to look at it too, which is discoveries can either be revolutionary or evolutionary. Revolutionary is where the discovery opens a whole wide new world of possibilities. Evolutionary is where the discovery is an important step in the advancement of an already known technology. Evolutionary discoveries, I think, have a clearer path to market because there are people already using some of them. And revolutionary can take a long time. A good example of that out of MIT is Moderna and messenger RNA. They were developing that technology for almost 10 years until the first commercial breakthrough came with COVID. Moderna raised over $2 billion in venture capital during that period leading up to the first implementation of a product. So that's sort of how I think about, what the problems are of going to market with technology.
Thank you very much, Joe. Moving to the next question that's related to this, and I would like to invite also Errol and Rieko. If you can provide some examples of best practices and success stories from Stanford and UC Irvine and also other universities in the US that relate to the topic of today.
Rieko?
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Ovi. I appreciate you inviting me to the panel, and great to be with Joe and Errol and minasan ohayou gozaimasu for everyone in Japan joining us. So I'm with the SPARK program at Stanford. We're a translational research program. So what that means is that we focus on the scientific research that needs to be done in order to get an invention licensable or brought to industry. So a lot of it is focusing on the right experiments to de-risk the science, to convince investors in biopharma that you have something that can be developable into the clinic. And we've been doing this for over 17 years now. 50% of the projects that we bring in end up becoming what we consider successful, meaning that they become licensed out to biopharma or licensed out to startup companies, which is a track that a lot of our participants in our program do, which is relevant to this conversation. I think from that experience and to touch on and add on to what Joe was saying about product market fit, we're very early stage, so we're in academia. And so the market is a long way away, sometimes 5 to 10 years away. So our version of the customer journey is making sure that our teams, and just to be clear, our program focuses on therapeutics and diagnostics, not so much on biomedical devices. There's a different program, biodesign at Stanford, that focuses on medical devices. The process is a little bit different. And so for us, these programs are separated, but the idea of understanding where your potential product is going to fit in the market is key to us as well, even though we're very early stage. And for that looks like something called the target product profile, where you have the characteristics of your molecule defined upfront that you are developing and how that fits to an unmet clinical need. And we provide small amounts of funding for our project teams. $50,000 a year is not very much. But even before we grant our funding to our teams, this is the first exercise that we have them do. So if you're a scientist, you might have an interesting scientific discovery. You might think it has an interesting clinical application, but the question is, have you actually gone out and talked to clinicians to find out where that therapeutic fits in the landscape of treatment? So these are all questions that, even at this early stage, is something that I think is important to do, and it's something that all of our teams are encouraged to do too. So I'll stop there, and I'll let other people contribute too. But that's sort of, I think, for us, a really key point.
Thank you, Rieko. One follow-up question for you. If you can share one example associated with your work at Stanford of a company that actually grew from, whose technology grew out of Stanford into a successful company.
Yeah, so there are many. Maybe one that I could highlight is there's a junior faculty member who is a clinician, and he's from Australia. And he, speaking of need finding, part of his clinical research was to go out into the field and understand how he's an ear surgeon, to understand how kids with ear infections, particularly severe ear infections, how they were being treated when they're very low resource settings. And in his case, he was looking at tympanic eardrum perforation, so that's tearing of the inner ear, which is usually a surgical procedure if you're here in the United States or Japan. But in rural and low resource settings, you don't have the luxury of a surgical operating room. So the question for him was, how would you develop a treatment that's appropriate for a low resource setting when you can't do surgery? So by definition, that's trying to understand, let's say, the market first, and understanding the constraints of that setting, and then developing a therapeutic in this case. So the solution was developing a therapeutic, a topical treatment that would be appropriate for that particular setting. So that's about starting the end in mind and then developing a therapeutic to match that. So he had this idea, brought it into Spark. He had an appropriate animal model to test the idea. Long story short, he formed a company called Oration, and that was licensed out to Astellas. And so that compound is now in clinical trial that's being led by Astellas company.
Thank you. Thank you for the concrete example and also for the earlier details. Would you like to pick up where Rieko left, Errol?
Thank you, Ovidiu, and thank you, Rieko, and thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be with both of you on this panel, and Ovidiu for all the work that you've been doing over many, many years to pull this off. It's really great to see it come to fruition. Thank you also for your service to this community. I think the only thing that I really want to add is that what you heard was that the answer to how to take something forward was it depends. And what I want to talk about is really how important it is to get the right mental model in place as you're starting to explore the commercialization path. And that mental model is different if it's a therapeutic or if it's a revolutionary or a medical device or a evolutionary type of innovation. And so I think it's really critical to have people around you that can help you set the stage for what the right mental model is. Because once you have the right mental model, it allows you to see the world through the appropriate lens, if you will. And the mental model that I like to talk about at a very high level revolves around just the risks of the company. And broadly speaking, companies at the earliest stages have 4 types of risk. They've got technology risk, which we all know about. They've got market risk, does anybody care? They've got team risk. Can this team pull this off? And they've got finance risk. Can we make money if this works? And every type of startup has a shape of a profile of that risk. And biotech have huge technology risk, but their market risk is modest. If it works, there's a potential market there. Obviously, the team and the finance risk are huge for startups out of academic institutions. But the point that I'm making is that the risk profile of what you're developing determines how you should invest your time and precious resources. And the therapeutic framework and the biotech and the life sciences and the synthetic biology, they all have sort of different profiles. And so I wanted to just reinforce the importance of those mental models to help you set the stage. And there are a lot of mental models out there. So that's the first thing that I want to say. In terms of an example, there probably the smallest medical device in the world is a stent that that perforates the eye to relieve the glaucoma pressure, and it's developed by a company called Glaukos. And that device is it's about the size of a grain of sand, and it's actually a machine piece of titanium. It's the smallest medical device in the world, as I understand it, and that's a project that was spun out of UCI about 20 years ago, and it's an example of the way that technologies can and do make their way to market.
Thank you so much, Errol. I think it will be helpful for the audience once we're done if you could share the names and the websites of all these companies, just to share them as resources with the audience. Moving now to back to Rieko. I have a question more around commercialization strategies. What do you think would be some of the most effective commercialization strategies that would be highly applicable to the biotech industry? And also, Errol and Joe, feel free to also contribute if you have some insights on this.
Yeah, I can start, and definitely would love to hear perspectives from the other panelists on this. In terms of commercialization strategy, yeah, I'm going to kind of start with where Errol started his previous answer, which is it depends. So if we're talking about, let's say, a later stage company, let's say, again, I work more in the therapeutics and diagnostic space, so that's my perspective is primarily driven from that experience. If you're in the clinic, then clearly you're further along the pipeline and you're looking at something like a merger or acquisition by biopharma. The space that we work in, again, is very early, like early stage academic discoveries. So in our case, they haven't formed a company yet, but they are interested in developing a company in some cases. So in that case, the commercialization strategies tend to be, formation of intellectual property or filing of intellectual property. In our experience, without intellectual property, very difficult to raise funding to start a company. In the absence of that, there's certainly other ways to commercialize too. And I think it really depends on finding the right business partners. So if it isn't licensing, it's about, whether or not you can work in a partnership where you're co-developing your compound or diagnostic in collaboration, or even in a contract research agreement with a company where they provide direct funding. So for us, we typically see intellectual property being the primary way to commercialize. So Stanford licensing out that technology either to, let's say, a big pharma company, or in many cases, because our discoveries are still fairly early stage, a lot of the teams will go on to start up a company and then we'll license the technology from Stanford to raise funding and develop it further.
Helpful. Thank you so much. Joe, maybe there was an element that Rieko mentioned on specifically on IP, and this is another one of our questions, is more around in what ways startups and companies and initiatives that are a little bit in the earlier phases can navigate the intellectual property challenges during the technology commercializations, and if you've seen some of these examples, both positives and negatives, just to share with our audience some of your lessons learned as you work so much in the field of intellectual property with IP vision, and also through your work as a teacher of the nuts and bolts of business plan class at MIT Sloan.
Okay, good. Well, certainly, maybe we could start with university-owned technology and the whole tech transfer process, because in that case, at least in the US, you had the Beall Act, which gave ownership of federally funded research IP to the university, but said you have to actually do something to help commercialize it. So in that case, the university has already started the patent application process and is paying some of the fees on that. So, from that perspective, if you're looking to license something from the university, and by the way, in MIT's case, I can't speak for other universities, the tech transfer office also will take on intellectual property that's not been funded by research, but it's good ideas that people have come up with if they think it has commercial potential. And for startups, usually the startups are somehow related to the technology, grad student or postdoc. And the trick is, how do you secure the IP before you have funding? And at least at MIT, they have a process for granting options to the licensee. So that enables the entrepreneur to search for investment by saying, look, I've got this great technology, and here's my game plan, and I've got an option to license the IP from the university, and we need your dollars to do the following things. And that gives you some you're putting together the pieces. An entrepreneur has to assemble a bunch of resources that he or she doesn't really control. Options, I think, at MIT run from 6 to 12 months and are not a lot of money. And there's some flexibility in extending that option period if the entrepreneur is really doing something well. If you're beyond the licensing part, and we're talking biotech, the main IP there is intellectual property category is patents. And these are expensive. A 2002 study by the US General Accounting Office showed that to obtain and maintain a single patent in the 10 major industrialized countries costs between $170,000 and $340,000. Those numbers are more like $290,000 and $580,000, brought to today's date. And from a US startup perspective, it's the foreign patents that are the expensive ones, because you have to file in each country, and there are translation costs, and separate prosecution and maintenance fees. So the strategy for startups here in the US could be to file provisional patent applications on things that you're doing, they're not university owned. Those are inexpensive, and they don't even have to have claims in them. What it does is establish a filing date for the material you describe, and you have 1 year to file the full utility patent with all the claims and everything. Meanwhile, you can use the time to obtain funding and advance the technology sufficient that perhaps you can attract a large company to partner with who will pick up the patent prosecution fees going forward. I just did this with a company, a neurostimulation company that I co-founded, a platform company, where we licensed one market to a major consumer product company, and they picked up all the prosecution costs. If we hadn't been able to do that, the costs were going to go through the roof, and we'd have to be very selective on which countries to go for.
I thank you so much, Joe. I have a question from Brandon in the audience, exactly to the points you mentioned. What do the options to license IP look like? Are they in the form of a sponsored research agreement? Do you have some more specifics on how they look like?
Well, can only speak for me. I've done licensing agreements with a lot of major universities over the years, but the option ones I only know from MIT. And there, it's basically an option to license, and you have to describe what the technology is. And what you usually have to do is have some idea of what the business plan is for what you're going to do. You can't just say I want an option without explaining it. And depending on what the technology is or what the supposed application is, it'll give a rough idea of the range of royalties and other fees that would be required, if you execute the final license. They're trying to facilitate the process, not sort of, okay, here's an option, go raise some money, and then we'll screw you on the back end.
Okay, no, I understand. Let me go to Errol now and talk a little bit more. If you could, Errol, connect the pieces between what Rieko has mentioned in terms of like the work at the very early stage with what Joe mentioned in terms of like securing or at least protecting, buying some time through the provisional patents. Where do you see, and you work so much with the National Science Foundation and the SBIR grants, where do you see the role of the National Science Foundation in providing some of these connecting tissues, in bringing some of these amazing innovations, biotech innovations to the market? And if you can point both some resources and also some examples. And if you've seen the National Science Foundation SBIR model also replicated in some other countries.
Yeah, I want to first begin by just reflecting on Joe's answer. Joe, it's a pleasure to be on this panel with you, and it just reminded me how 30 years ago I learned from you, how much I learned from you then, how much I learned from you now. And I think it's without exaggeration, you literally wrote the book on this stuff. And the nuts and bolts of business planning has been an incredible contribution to generations of MIT entrepreneurs. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you for that contribution. I know I benefited greatly from it. And I know hundreds of people who feel similarly.
Just on that, Errol, for a moment, that course is actually open to anyone now that we can do it virtually. So we had close to 500 people in this past January, and they're from all over the world. So it was interesting to see. But thank you for your comment on that.
Yeah,
I'm sharing the resource with everyone. And disclaimer: I was Joe humble teaching assistant in one of his years, and that's how we got to meet. And I also, like you, Errol, I learned from the master.
And that resource should be the first, second, and third on your list of resources, Joe. And thanks for making that available to others. With respect to your question, I think the only thing that I want to add is that when I was at the National Science Foundation, we did a lot of work supporting academic research and commercialization, and it goes on to this day. And I was always surprised by how little consideration was given to the business model of the research as it was perceived or initiated to be taken out of the lab. And I found a lot of people that had ideas that they thought might be worthwhile taking forward and commercializing, and yet hadn't done the homework to figure out the unit economics or the size of the market or the market dynamics. And so one of the things that I would suggest as a critical first step as you're thinking about what the opportunity is and what it could be, is to go off and do that homework through a process that's captured in a business model or a business model canvas, using customer discovery as the framework for exploring the unknowns that exist on that in that activity.
Great. Thank you both for your remarks. Let me move back to Rieko. What key obstacles have you seen that the biotech startups encounter when bringing scientific discoveries to market? And if you could provide some examples from the US, from Japan, or any other countries that you're familiar with.
Yeah, key obstacles, we've highlighted some of them already, which is understanding the market that you want to develop your technology for, and having that come across in your pitch. I've participated in a number of pitch competitions from Japanese companies, small startups coming out of academia. And again, terrific science, and an interesting idea, but having, understanding, again, the unmet clinical need, making sure that clinical need is compelling, and having that come across in your pitch is a pretty important detail if it's going to be investable. So I would say that that's one obstacle. And I think some of the things that were highlighted earlier about, doing a business model canvas, that's definitely one way to go about trying to uncover that information to include in your pitch. Without it, it's really difficult to raise funding. And that's I think the second obstacle. Even for our teams in the heart of Silicon Valley, it is not easy to raise money. And part of the challenge is finding out who the right investor is for your particular indication or your particular modality. And that really depends on, again, are you developing a therapeutic? Are you developing a diagnostic? Are you developing a device? And even within those categories, you're going to have VCs that specialize in different indications. And that's a moving target. It's not uncommon for our teams to meet with 50 to 100 different investors before they land one investor. So I think the pathway, if you're thinking of starting a biotech company, I ask each of our Spark teams, again, they're academics, do you really want to go down this route? I know it's very attractive to think about starting your own company, but for most academics, their primary passion is scientific discovery. And starting a company and the skills needed to start a company look very different than doing original novel discovery research. And so it's a question for the would-be entrepreneur is that, are you willing to put in the time and effort to take those meetings, to do those pitches, to do that homework? Because it's going to take a significant amount of time away from the lab to do that. So that would be the third thing, is the obstacles. Do the inventors have the time to really take it down the path of commercialization? And if they don't want to, that's fine. There's other ways to take that technology forward. It doesn't have to be a startup company.
And this is a very good point, Rieko. Thank you. We'll be discussing in the third virtual broadcast specifically about this, how to build teams for biotech ventures and understanding a little bit of the different sets of skills that you need to actually build a successful venture where the very strong intellectual background and the technology background needs to be complemented with the business skills and go-to-market experience from other executives that you can bring in the team. Any other thoughts, please, Errol?
May I jump in? So I just wanted to reflect on what Rieko said about asking the would-be entrepreneur, the technologist, if they really want to go through this process. And I want to emphasize that the importance of that consideration really at the earliest stages can't be overemphasized. And I find that there are a lot of people who get caught up in the theater of wanting to do a startup and miss the scope and nature of the work that needs to take place. And I've often found that the customer discovery process acts as an analog to give people a taste of what it's like to be in an ambiguous situation and to capture the information that needs to be in order to move forward in a exploratory fashion. It gives that analog or that feel. And there are many people who go through that process and come to realize that this isn't what I want to do. And it's best to find that out earlier in the process, as early in the process as possible. And so I just want to emphasize how important it is to have that deep consideration and not get caught up in the theater of startups.
Thank you, Errol. I'm gonna start taking questions from the audience, and thank you to our colleagues in the audience who already started to send questions. We want to make this session as practical and as relevant for you, so I strongly encourage you to continue to send questions. So not only yourself will benefit, but also your other participants in today's virtual broadcast. So first question, and please feel free, dear speakers, to let me know which one would like to take it up. How is the market for digital therapeutics if we consider licensing out of that therapy in the US or globally in any region?
Want to take that one, Rieko?
The digital therapeutics, probably we have an entrepreneur in the audience who is thinking about licensing in that therapy in the US.
Yes, I think I might need some clarification on what's meant by digital therapeutics. Are we talking about digital technologies or?
Okay, sure. Let us invite the participant to clarify this question while we take the second one, the next one. We are a very early stage startup originating from academia. The technology is based on fundamental research, making it a versatile platform technology with multiple potential market exits. Therefore, we are in a situation where we need to explore the business viability in each market and establish the target markets. Could you please provide some tips or tools for conducting specific market needs and customer discovery?
I could answer that based on something that I'm actually involved in now that's not out of the university. But as I said, I co-founded a company based on a neurostimulation platform for a variety of things. And the approach we did was to look at where research had been done before to understand what was working in various markets. We looked at how big the market was, how many people had the condition that we were. This is for treating chronic conditions. It's not it's not curing cancer, but it's alleviating a lot of chronic conditions. How many people had that? Had there been any what attempts have been made to cure it through regular pharma type stuff? We also looked at the intellectual property and said, can we carve out a defensible position, or is the waterfront too confused? So, for example, there's a lot of IP in neurostimulation for pain management, and we said even though we think ours is a better way to do it, that's just walking into a thicket of patents, and we're not going to go after that market. So we went through a very rigorous process, and the first market we went after was for overactive bladder, and the second one, and we managed to license that and develop a foundation product and license it off to a consumer product company. Hopefully, you'll be seeing that in the next few years from now. The second one was sleep apnea. Again, we saw the benefits the technology had, the size of the market, and whether we could build out a really defensible patent position. So that's just a live case study for me right now.
Thank you, Joe. Let me ask the next question to Errol. It's a reflection on one of your earlier remarks. One of our participants asked if you can provide more information on any books, papers, or other resources related to detailing the commercialization strategies based on different mental models as you shared. So if you have any specific insights here, or if you could share with us, and we'll share with the entire community.
Well, on the first blush, the business model canvas that we talked about as a mental model is very powerful. And there's a company called Strategizer who has developed a platform that is easy to use and quite straightforward. The concept of a business model canvas was first brought to bear, I don't know, 10 years ago. And it's a tool that is very easy to find. It's developed by a gentleman named Alex Osterwalder. That was part of his PhD thesis in 2010-ish timeframe. And it's a very simple, straightforward tool, and one that I recommend to anybody who's getting ready to explore the commercialization pathway for technologies, biotech or not.
Great. Thank you. And my colleague, I already shared the resource you just mentioned with the community in the chat. Let me go back now. Yeah, please. Sorry, please, Rieko.
I think Errol's response is also applicable to the previous question. If I understood correctly, the question was about a platform technology that's looking for applications and potential applications. So certainly doing a business model canvas would be one place to start. What I like about that is that it gets you thinking about figuring out who are the key opinion leaders in the field that you need to be talking to understand exactly how your technology or the outcomes of that technology platform can benefit clinical care. It also gets you into looking at potential licensing opportunities of the platform itself. So the nice thing about a platform technology is that there's multiple ways you can move forward. You can use the platform to partner with companies to develop a specific solution. I'm not exactly clear on what the platform does.
We just got I don't have the earpiece, but IO sent me the clarification. So we are digitalizing and making.
Just to clarify, I'm referring to not that question, but the one about an early stage startup that has.
Yes, the other question.
Yeah, it's a platform looking for potential markets. And so I was just trying to emphasize, in addition to doing the business model canvas, it's an opportunity to not only look for clinicians and healthcare experts that can help you situate where that platform technology would be useful, but also to think about, partnering and licensing with other biopharma companies that could use your platform technology as well. So, the point is you may need to develop multiple business model canvases because the style of the partnership and the arrangement might be different depending on who you think your customer is.
Yes, it was a very question with different dimensions. The clarification about the earlier one about digital therapeutics, and I confused the question. For example, we are digitalizing, making the therapy for example, behavioral therapy to treat kids with autism. It is an application based on the ABA principles for the kids with autism spectrum disorder. So those are like the clarifications, if any of the speakers can provide any insights on this.
I have a little bit of experience in this area, and our regulatory landscape requires that digital therapeutics go through an FDA process similar to medical devices. And it is increasingly clear that that regulatory pathway is going to be required and needed to get to market. And the experience that I have is with a virtual reality platform with a behavioral component to it. And the FDA has started to allow claims and market indications that are on and off label, just like a medical device. And so the clinical trial regime is going to be similar to that of a medical device. And the rigor is also going to be similar to that of a medical device. And so the boon that we thought we might have gotten from the fact that it was a digital may or may not be the case with respect to the regulatory. And I know that the overall landscape of digital therapeutics is increasingly complicated by this new regulatory that I just described with our Food and Drug Administration.
One follow-up question here, and is if you can help the specific entrepreneur think, considering any particular region to commercialize this application, how would you go about it in terms of finding maybe one of the most ideal markets? I would think, like, obviously you need to have some sort of market data in terms of how many kids with autism, and I've been reading that unfortunately there is an increasing trend in terms of numbers of kids that are also maybe a function of the climate changes and some other poor quality air and some other bad weather. But if you have any other insights, feel free to add.
I might, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Well, I was just going to follow up on Errol's for a moment. We've seen situations where people have gone and done their clinical trials in another country at lower cost and a faster turnaround, and use that to come back to bolster a case in the U.S. As a way of accelerating that process. I don't know what the total track record for everybody who does that, but that was one interesting approach that I'd seen recently.
Thank you, Joe. Please, Rieko. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of autism specifically, in the US, we have a number of nonprofit patient advocacy groups that are very disease specific, including ones in autism. I'm happy to dig those up and share those after the webinar as well. You can try reaching out to those nonprofits because they tend to have the market data and connections to the patient community. Speaking of clinical trials, Facebook groups, again, organized around specific disease areas, can also be very valuable, believe it or not. Facebook is a really great self-organizing way for parents who are sharing stories and looking for new treatment options. That might be another way to look for potential patient groups to engage with.
Thank you. Thank you both. Let me go back to one of questions I prepared for you. What steps do you think can be taken to foster a more supportive ecosystem for biotech entrepreneurship, specifically taking into account the culture and regulatory differences across the US and Japan? Rieko, you sit at the intersection of US and Japan, and Joe, you've been instrumental in building the entrepreneurial ecosystem at MIT. From your points of view, and Errol as well, when you look at some of these key components, where do you see US is really strong in terms of the entrepreneurial ecosystem needed to commercialize technologies in the biotech sector, and which areas do you see Japan maybe also strong, and the other way around?
Do you want me to start?
You want to go ahead?
Yeah. So when I look at Japan, I think, excellent basic research at its leading universities, excellent pharmaceutical industries, long history of, a strong pharma sector. And I would say burgeoning, developing biotech, biopharma startup ecosystem. I would say it's still on its way. The area that, again, we focus on is how to take those academic discoveries and advance them to the point where they can be startup companies and investable by, private funding. And that space, that translational research space, is often misunderstood. It's not taught in academia. So it really requires a lot of input and expertise from industry in order to understand how to develop these inventions so that they meet industry standards for them to feel like you have something that is worth developing into the clinic. And that, again, you're doing the right experiments. In this case, when you do translational research, it's not just about novelty. It's actually not about novelty. It's about safety and efficacy, because at the end of the day, you're looking for regulatory approval. So making sure that you're focusing on those types of experiments. So this is something that's hard to do even in the US. And I know in Japan, this is an area that they particularly are trying to develop because it's necessary. If you're going to aim for more startup companies, biotech startup companies in Japan, you want to make sure that the scientific foundations of those biotech companies are strong. And so making sure that you're de-risking the science appropriately is a really critical step. And that's where, as Spark at Stanford, we're helping our counterparts in Japan and to try to figure out how best to take the knowledge and expertise, particularly from industry, and have that be brought forward in the early stage of drug discovery and development. And that's still a work in progress. But I would say that that's kind of where we think that there's an important opportunity between the US and Japan.
Thank you, Rieko. Joe?
My perspective is basically the MIT ecosystem in the Boston area. And that's taken a long time to develop over many years. So, I've talked to governments around the world, and everyone wants a shortcut. Typically, the first thing they'll do is say, well, we can't get funding, so let's set up a fund. And that helps, but it's only one component. It's from the government side, it's really sustained support over a long period of time, which sometimes can be difficult politically. In 2008, Massachusetts launched an initiative to invest $1 billion over 10 years in life sciences. And that's paid off in quite a number of ways. One of the things people found was, if you're moving out of the lab at a university, finding space to do biotech, where you need lab space and testing equipment, that's hard. We had a hard time with one of the companies I did before all of this stuff got going, just trying to find a hood somewhere. So some of that money went into things to support accelerators like Lab Central that's here in Cambridge, where they provide lab space and some equipment and a community of entrepreneurs in biotech. It's funded initially partly by the government and some of the pharma companies who wanted an eye on latest developments. So that was one thing. When you look around and say, how do you de-risk, how do you make it easier for people to do stuff? That's how you start to build an ecosystem. And you can't really just copy programs from other places. You really have to figure out what works in your environment. I have an expression I used, you can't take penguins out of Antarctica and think they'll survive in the tropical rainforests. You have to create the conditions for an ecosystem. And so there are a number of steps that can be done in that regard, but that's a longer discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. We got 2 more questions from our audience, and I'm mindful also of the time. I think this one is also for you, Joe. I'm having a very difficult time acquiring human resources who can do strategic intellectual property licensing in university, or maybe for you as well, Errol. How do you acquire human resources who can understand the value of IP for deep tech originating from universities? What kind of backgrounds and skills are especially required of such people?
You're talking about bringing someone on your team?
Yes, recruiting someone in the team and what sort of backgrounds and skills they should have.
Well, traditionally, especially patent stuff was viewed as totally the domain of the patent lawyers. And, there are some good ones out there, but by and large, they're focused on the patents. They're not focusing on the business strategy of, what to do. And so, without a clear idea of who the competitors are in the marketplace, you need somebody, I think, who has some business skills and some understanding of intellectual property. You don't certainly have to be an expert, unless you're bringing someone in to write patents for you. So.
Good. And I think you also have one of the key papers on the nuts and bolts of business plans is how you have different profiles for your founders in your team. Let me get the next question is, we are a startup based in Japan. Our key IP is wireless powering, and we are looking into applications in the medical field. as our business expands. Could you please shed some light in terms of potential medical applications that won't be too tough from a legal regulation standpoint? For example, previously we were thinking about wirelessly powering pacemaker, which will require tremendous amount of time, resources, and tenacity to tackle the regulatory affairs. Any of you, Errol or Rieko?
This is the bit of counsel that I have, is every business activity can be broken up into two things. Those things that are not known to the company and those things that are unknown to the world. And the things that are not known to the company, you can conduct research in, and you can come up with a strategy or a game plan. And those things that are unknown to the world, you can only discover by experimenting. I don't know which category this one fits in, but it feels to me like this is part of the unknown category that you literally can't answer until you start experimenting. I'm just guessing.
Yes, excellent question. Thank you. Let me ask a question around the technology transfer offices that play a pivotal role in supporting the commercialization of biotech innovation. Where do you, what offices, of course, MIT and Stanford and UC Irvine are concrete leading examples. Where do you see this specific role of the technology transfer offices moving forward? From where it is now, how do you see its future? Let me
I'll
ask
take a stab at that one.
Errol, please.
So, at UC Irvine, 10 years ago, we made a choice to combine the technology licensing office with the industry-sponsored research group, with the new ventures group, and together put them under one umbrella, the Chief Innovation Officer. And my role as the Chief Innovation Officer is to bring those pieces together to act in concert and together in a way that affects the impact of the research by reducing the friction of getting a license out the door and into a new venture. And I know that model of trying to coordinate among the organizational structures is new and something that is being explored at other organizations around the country and around the world. But I think the technology licensing office is critical, and their participation, both for good and for ill, is an important consideration as to whether or not a project is successful.
Wonderful. I'm mindful of the time. I just realized we have just 2 more minutes. Very briefly, Rieko or Joe?
Oh, I just think that's terrific, what I just heard from the initiative at UC Irvine. I don't really have much to add. That's not my particular area of expertise, but I was surprised along the same lines to know that our Office of Technology Licensing last year started a new fund. And I think along the lines of what Errol was mentioning is, how do you take, intellectual property and get it out the door in a way that's easier, and starting a fund to help some of those inventors advance the technology a little bit further when needed, I think is maybe an approach that technology transfer offices are looking at.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time. I will ask this question, but if we can provide the answer maybe virtually, I'm sharing here. Antra, I'm a mother raising a Down syndrome baby in Japan, has 10 years of background in IT. Recently just started a similar project based on ESDM, ABA principle with Gakugei University. She also has connections with families. I hope we can discover any chance to collaborate. Antra is the person that asks the digital therapeutic questions. We'll follow up on this to see what sort of suggestions you have. Let me thank our great speakers tonight, Joe from MIT, Rieko from Stanford, and Errol from UC Irvine. I'm grateful for your time, for your insights. We'll be following up with you so that we can compile a list of additional resources that we can share with the audience. I strongly encourage the audience to sign up for the third virtual broadcast that will be on the topic of building a successful team for a biotech venture coming up in March. My colleague Ayo share with you the registration link. We'll also be sending a survey for our participants today. And I want to thank our partners, Japan Society of Northern California, Steve and Larry for their support with the BioJent program. I would like to encourage you to join biojent.com. I also shared this and will be following up. And I would like to thank the US Embassy in Tokyo for their wonderful support of the BioJent program. Without that support, we'll not be able to provide this high quality entrepreneurship support to the Japanese entrepreneurs. And also big thanks to the US Consulate in Fukuoka, to Brendan Posin, and to our partners, Greater Tokyo Bio Community, and also ORIC. Thank you, everyone, and we'll be following up, sharing with you the detailed resources. And we look forward to having you with us both on the biojent.com platform as well on the third virtual broadcast. I'm your host, Ovidiu Bujorean, CEO and founder of OviBees Ventures. And thank you, everyone. Again, have a wonderful day and a wonderful evening here in the US.
Thank you.